mean, we on the right, we love the Constitution. I do too. Bill of Rights, everybody knows it. Freedom, limited government, all these things. Did we get it wrong in the beginning? And I realize what America was and how wonderful it was, but doesn't it make it inevitable that if you have a live and let live country, that you are eventually going to be infected with some kind of ideology that doesn't go along with any live and let live stuff? In fact, they want to dominate. Isn't that just human nature?
Maybe, but I do think that the Constitution was a noble experiment. You know, it grew out of an Enlightenment philosophy, and we did our best, they did their best to try to restrain the state with a piece of parchment. A lot of things went wrong in the meantime. Of course, there were some problems from the very beginning, you know, among which slavery, but many others. And unfortunately, over the last 100 years, especially, we've seen the rise of administrative states. So that's a very interesting case, right? Because we know who's in charge of this country right now. It's not the elected politicians, it's the permanent bureaucrats, right? So, and there are 435 agencies that rule without oversight really effectively from courts, and certainly not from the elected branches of government. That thing is not in the Constitution, right? So a return to the Constitution would actually fix probably 80-90% of the problems in this country. I'll mention one other thing too that I think is really interesting, and I wonder if you've thought about this. But the electoral map that we saw from the midterm showed a lot of geography that was painted red, and then just little tiny cities in each state that were painted blue, right? And that was a very strange thing. We've seen this, you know, again and again in many elections over the past. If it were not for the 17th Amendment, that would not be happening. The 17th Amendment allowed for the directional election of senators and in effect allowed big and urban centers to swamp the political influence of everybody who lives outside of them. Majorities in the large major cities are determining everything. I mean, New York would have 2 red senators if the 17th Amendment were not passed. So, I mean, the idea of a bicameral system of Congress is that one was supposed to be elected directly by the people, and the other was appointed by the state legislatures that themselves were representative of the whole geography and the whole people of the state, so that you wouldn't get this strange bias towards urban centers dominating and basically oppressing everybody else. So that was the 17th Amendment, and that it's not really a source of controversy. I think it probably should be, because it massively distorted the way the U.S. Congress works. Now, the 18th Amendment got rid of, implemented alcohol prohibition, and the 19th Amendment repealed that. So we have a precedent in this country for recognizing when we've made a constitutional error. And I would say the 17th Amendment is one of those things. Really, just the elections the other day would have turned out very differently without that little distorting twist that happened with the 17th Amendment, which I think was only passed in something like 1913.
Well, how do we undo it then if we're never going to have a supermajority in that way by enough places? I mean, it's one thing to say repeal it, and I agree with you 100%. How do we do that?
Well, for one thing, I think we need to start talking about it. That's one deal. And also, we need to get reasonable people back in charge of the Senate, which I think, it might have happened this time if we had played our cards right, but it didn't happen. It just means that we're going to put it off to the future. I think the crisis in this country is going to get bad enough that we can get majorities that are sensible and ready and brave and can make the requisite change that we need. The kinds of change we need is towards a more decentralized system, a dismantling of the administrative structures of the state, a restoration of the bicameral system of Congress. In other words, really restore that original Constitution the way they imagined things.
A missile landed in Poland yesterday, and Zelensky came out and said it was Russia, and now I find out today it was Ukraine, but it was air defense, but I don't know. I can't make sense of anything. And this is why I hate this whole conflict. I don't trust anyone or anything, except for Brian Dean Wright, because he always comes in here and shoots us straight. Of the great President's Daily Brief podcast, less than 20 minutes every day, get boned up on all the news. Brian, okay, but who shot the missile? Is it a big deal? Is it a small deal? Who's attacking Poland?
Oh my gosh, what a mess. Well, we all predicted this. The longer that this war would go on, the more these kinds of situations would happen that would potentially escalate because of an on purpose or an accidental shooting like this. So here's the deal. Yesterday, very early yesterday, Russia shot a whole bunch of missiles, around 100 of them, into Ukraine, blowing up lots of things. At that same time, there was an explosion inside of Poland. Who did it? Well, the Russians said it wasn't us. Poland said, holy smokes, we think it probably was the Russians. They picked up the phone and started talking to their NATO members saying, we think we were just attacked by the Russians. Let's get together and talk about potentially responding against Moscow. Except NATO and others, to include the United States, said, we're not real sure that that's true, that Russia actually attacked Poland. We actually are looking at the trajectory of that missile, and we think it came from inside of Ukraine. Now, right now, Ukraine's President Zelensky says, nope, definitely still wasn't us. Everybody else, to include throughout Europe, the United States and Moscow, saying, no, it definitely was you, Ukraine. So now we have this very strange situation. Who really shot the missile and why? Now, the official story that you just heard from our Secretary of Defense is it was an accident. It was one of those air defense missiles that just went to the wrong place. But it's also possible, isn't it, that the Ukrainians did this on purpose. In the middle of this salvo, the Russians are sending all these missiles. They're like, what if we sent one into Poland? That would get everybody excited, and that could potentially draw more people onto our side more firmly. Would that lead to potentially World War III? Yeah, but who cares, Zelensky says. We just want everybody in this war, and we want them on our side to end it. So who knows what's going to happen next? There's an investigation. But right now, Zelensky is still saying it wasn't their missile. It was Russia's.
Okay. Let's deal with the missile thing for a second here. Is it possible? Look, I was just a dumb mortarman. All right, I know rifles and mortars. Is it possible for a missile to just go to the wrong country? Because that doesn't seem good if that's possible.
Well, so we have different missile systems involved. We've got a Western missile system and then the old Soviet systems, which actually both the Russians and the Ukrainians are using. That technology is old. And normally if it misses what it's supposed to hit, the newer ones, the Western ones, actually self-destruct. But the older ones, the Soviet ones that, again, both the Ukrainians and the Russians are using, those just keep flying until they finally run out of fuel and they crash and they blow up. So is it possible that one of these air defense missiles was trying to strike one of the Russian missiles and then missed and then it just kept flying? Not real sure. The investigation will detail that out. But what's interesting is Zelensky knows that. He knows it's possible that one of his own missiles actually struck in Poland, but he's sticking with his story. Wasn't possible. It definitely was the Russians who attacked the Poles.
Okay, Brian, this is how I view this conflict, and please feel free to correct me if I'm wrong about anything. Scumbag A, that's Vladimir Putin, corrupt scumbag A, chooses to invade the nation of corrupt scumbag B, Zelensky, and now they're in some kind of a stalemate, only corrupt scumbag B has the backing of the Western nations, Vladimir Putin's still in the fight. The only people I feel bad for in this entire story are the Ukrainian people who've been bombed out and murdered and have their lives upended. I have a very hard time caring about this conflict because I don't like either of them. Am I crazy?
Nope, spot on, brother. I will tell you that the numbers of Ukrainian citizens who have been killed are upwards of 40,000 people. So you are absolutely right to have a gut-wrenching response to this war and to want it to end. One other quick piece on this. When Ukraine says, hey, the Russians are attacking, it's sort of like the tail wagging the dog. They're telling us in Europe, hey, get more involved in our war. They're acting like they're the senior partner, and that's the big risk here. They're going to draw us into a conflict that we really should be managing differently.
Sam Bankman-Fried, FTX, some kind of scam, or was it an accident? We got to talk to our friend Carol Roth about this. Joining me now, our friend, recovering investment banker and author of the outstanding book, The War on Small Business, Carol Roth. Carol, pretend like I'm really dumb. That should be easy. Explain FTX. Explain.
All right, this is going to be a stretch to pretend like you're really dumb, but I will buckle down and do my best. So I'm going to start off by saying that I can't actually even tell you what FTX is. I can only tell you what they represented themselves to be, because this is the most messed up rabbit hole of a story that we are going to be peeling back the onion on probably for years could end up being a top story of the decade. So here's the weird stuff I've learned, and I'm gonna just couch it all saying this is all alleged and reported. I'm just basing this on what other people and other news outlets are saying. So this is a cryptocurrency exchange that kind of came out of nowhere a couple of years ago. You may have been, if you're not a crypto person, familiar with it if you watched the Super Bowl and you saw the Larry David commercial, or if you went to the arena in Miami and saw FTX Arena. So this is this cryptocurrency exchange. It was founded by this guy who's now 30. He was in his late 20s, came out of nowhere. When they said, where did you get the money for this? He kind of was really vague and said, oh, I had a bunch of lines of credits that I kept snowballing, which, by the way, is not the way that you create a multi-billion-dollar company. And within a few years, it goes to a valuation of $32 billion, and then in a couple of days goes to zero. So allegedly what they were doing is if you gave your money to the crypto exchange to trade on it, they were allegedly giving it to their sister company, this hedge fund, and they were investing it in all kinds of things, which is not something you're supposed to be doing with client money. And then the sister company was taking the tokens that FTX had created. The best way I can explain that is, let's say you decided, Jesse, that you were going to have Jesse coins. And we know that Jesse coins, you just made them up. You don't necessarily have any value, but you're starting to sell them to people. And I go, hey, Jesse, let's really do this. I'm going to buy a bunch of them, and we'll pump up the price. And then we'll make everybody think that Jesse coins are something big, even though there was nothing underneath it. So that's what the sister company's doing. So basically, this guy in his 20s, who always kind of creeped me out, I just thought in a normal crypto way, not in a ultra scammy shenanigan way. But he said he was an effective altruist. He just wanted to get really, really rich so he could give away his money. And he did this while being the second largest Democratic donor to the tune of around $40 million in the last election cycle. And he's telling you this from a $40 million penthouse in the Bahamas, because he's doing it for the good of the people. He's got this huge penthouse, and of course, while supporting the Democrats' big policy, he's in the tax haven of the Bahamas. Now, also, and I know that you've got lots of questions, but it just gets really even weirder. His parents are two Stanford professors. His father has helped Elizabeth Warren draft legislation for taxes back in 2016. She thanked him on his website. His mom, with no experience, came up with this huge PAC and is all of a sudden this major impact donor. He was tied to the WEF, which scrubbed their partnership from the website, but you can find it from the Wayback Machine. Oh, and he helped the Ukraine. They had $54 million in crypto donations that were converted into currency for them to spend on their war. Some piece of that came with help of FTX that allowed you to take your crypto and they would turn it into other currency and donate to the exchange. So there's a lot going on here. There are many, many more questions than answers, but it is one word, and that is bananas.
Okay, I'm going to ask about a couple details here because, look, I'm much more knowledgeable now than I was a couple minutes ago when we started this conversation. But one thing, you said he took all this money as a crypto exchange and then gave it to a hedge fund. Now, I understand you're not supposed to do that, and that's bad, it may be illegal, and all those things, but that actually sounds more productive to me. If I was giving a bunch of money instead of having it in crypto, a hedge fund doesn't sound like a bad idea. So what happened to the hedge fund where he sent all the money?
It's his hedge fund. It's a sister company. So it's him and his supposed alleged girlfriend that may or may not be part of this polyamorous cabal of 10, 20-something-year-olds that are all living in the Bahamas. She was the one who was in charge of this. This 20-something who, if you listen to videos with her, if you saw her, Jesse, you'd have words, but I'm just not going to go there. But at any rate, so he's taking it and basically funneling it to a sister company. So it's not like he gave it to some major hedge fund as an investment, which still, by the way, would be entirely illegal with customer deposits, but it's going to his people. And now all of a sudden there was a hack and money had been, dissipated and disappeared. And it's unclear. It's, in a process, they brought in the guy who did the cleanup for Enron to now take over this company and try and get the people who made deposits and other creditors back some of their money. But there's just no idea of how much of it at this point has been completely dissipated through, highly questionable to possibly fraudulent and illegal activity.
Okay, you know what? We're gonna set that story aside for a moment because here's the thing, Carol. What I don't understand is fraud, no fraud, scam. How you go from a country worth $20 to $30 billion to worth zero? I don't understand how that's even possible.
Yeah, so I think that's part of the question, these fraudulent activities. I think the things that people are going to be looking into are obviously the ties to Democratic donors, the ties to Ukraine, from this fraud, who were the folks who benefited from it. And I think, based again on some of the things that I'm seeing that I think we'll probably revisit again soon, there could be also all kinds of other really bad, weird things going on. And I do think, when you look at this, I think this is a conduit, whether intentional or not, for our government to come in, and they're not going to give a bailout, but they're going to say, this is why we need crypto regulation. And they're going to use that because you need congressional approval for a CBDC, a central bank digital currency backed by the Fed. They're probably going to try to sneak that into that bill and get Congress to approve it. So we need to be vigilant and keep our eyes on what's happening. I don't know if this is a useful crisis or an intentional one, but I'm telling you, this has the underpinnings of a huge story. And because it's complicated, people are not going to want to get into the weeds. We need to get into the weeds on this one.
The American people rejected, soundly rejected, the anti-democratic, authoritarian, nasty, and divisive direction the MAGA Republicans wanted to take our country in.
Okay, well, that's one theory. Let's find out what Kurt and Terry want to say about that. Kurt Schlichter, senior columnist, townhall.com, also author of the new book, Inferno, and my buddy Terry Schilling, president of the American Principles Project. All right, Kurt, everyone has a theory. Whenever you lose, everyone has theories as to why you lost. It's this guy's fault, it's Trump, it's McConnell, it's McCarthy, it's the sky, it's the abortion, it's whatever. Kurt Schlichter, we're all a little bit sore. Why'd we lose?
Look, we lawyers have a word for this, or a phrase. It's called joint several liability. It means a bunch of people can be equally responsible for the same problem. There are a lot of things that went wrong, and we have to have the courage to face them. That includes people who, like Donald Trump, need to face the Donald Trump problems. People who don't like Donald Trump need to face their own problems. We need to look at the Republican leadership. We need to look at the tactics, techniques, and procedures we were using. We need to use the issue sets we were putting out there. The fact is, it did not get beyond the margin of fraud. It did not get between the margin of the relatively small amount that some of the new voting rules allow the other side to get, and that maybe we should be exploiting ourselves. I don't like the blame thrower act. I want to find out what the problem is. I want to get it done, but that means some people need to go away. That's fine. We got to win this in 2024.
Okay. Terry, who's to blame?
I think two people are two groups are to blame. It's those establishment, conventional wisdom GOPers who told us that we just need to make this election about the economy and about jobs and about 10% inflation. We won those groups of people, but where we got killed was abortion. And that was because Democrats campaigned like crazy on abortion and how radical Republicans were, and Republicans didn't mention the A word. If you really wanted to win this cycle, you had to show how extreme Democrats were, which, by the way, I still think that aborting a baby in the 9th month that's 8 pounds is pretty extreme. And I think the vast majority of Americans are against that. But how many Republicans actually went on offense there? The other thing that I think we have to blame is this current election system where the Democrats are focused on collecting ballots of their party, and Republicans are focused on trying to win over voters. One is industrialized, it's mechanical, and the other is romantic, and it's systemic. And we need to, if the Republican Party is going to win elections in the future, we need to be just as mechanical and just as methodical as the Democrats are in harvesting their ballots.
Kurt, you referenced the Trump problem. What are you talking about?
Well, look, Trump was partly to blame for this. He's the head guy. The commander's responsible for everything the unit does or doesn't do. He helped pick some guys who didn't get it done. He didn't spend the money he could have. But, while I've got criticisms of Trump, and I write about him in Town Hall today at length, I think it is very simplistic for people to say, well, if we just dump Trump, we'll be fine. Look, Trump came along for a reason, and the problems that got us Trump have not gone away. We need to do a deep dive to get to the point where a significant majority of the American people will vote for us. The simple fact is, a lot of people will not vote for us, more than the number should be. There's always going to be some hardcores who are unswaverable. But the fact is, we just didn't get the numbers. And that goes whether you have the quote unquote bad candidates like Dr. Oz, or the good candidates like Adam Laxalt, who on paper is perfect and he's a great guy. But they didn't get it done. It didn't happen. So we've got to figure out why, and we've got to look deep into ourselves. I agree on the mechanics of voting. I think that we have a different voting system, and we need to approach that. That's the battlefield, whether we like it or not. I think we need to talk and debate about how we handled abortion, and maybe we handled it too well. Maybe we were too aggressive on it. Maybe we weren't aggressive enough. Maybe it's a different issue that's important, but we need to talk about it, and we need to develop thick skin so when we do the after action review of this, cluster, we don't make the same mistakes again.
Don't miss Jesse Kelly Breaks History, Che Guevara, the latest episode of a new series available now exclusively for First TV supporters. Visit the First TV app or thefirsttv.com to subscribe and start watching today.